8 billion is old enough to ask, what did you do for our world and for our planet when you had the chance? Excellencies, this UN climate conference is a reminder that the answer is in our hands. And the clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. The war in Ukraine, other conflicts have caused so much bloodshed and violence and had dramatic impacts all over the world. But we cannot accept that our attention is not focused on climate change. We must, of course, work together to support peace efforts and end the tremendous suffering. But climate change is on a different timeline and a different scale. It is a defining issue of our age. It is the central challenge of our century. It is unacceptable, outrageous, and self-defeating to put it on the back burner. Indeed, many of today's conflicts are linked with growing climate chaos. And the war in Ukraine has exposed the profound risks of our fossil fuel addiction. And today's crisis cannot be an excuse for backsliding or greenwashing. If anything, they are a reason for greater urgency, stronger action, and effective accountability. Excellencies, human activity is the cause of the climate problem, so human action must be the solution. Action to re-establish ambition and action to rebuild trust, especially between North and South. The science is clear. Any hope of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees means achieving global net zero emissions by 2050. But that 1.5 degree goal is on life support and the machines are rattling. We are getting dangerously close to the point of no return. And to avoid that dire fate, all G20 countries must accelerate their transition now in this decade. Developed countries must take the lead, but emerging economies are also critical to bending the global emissions curve. Last year in Glasgow, I called for coalitions of support for high-emitting emerging economies to accelerate the transition from coal towards renewables. We are making progress with the Just Energy Transition partnerships, but much more is needed. And that is why at the beginning of Cop27, I'm calling for a historic pact between developed and developing economies, and especially developed and emerging economies, a climate solidarity pact. A pact in which all countries make an extra effort to reduce emissions this decade in line with 1.5 degree goal. A pact in which wealthier countries and international financial institutions provide financial and technical assistance to help emerging economies speed their own renewable energy transition. A pact to independence on fossil fuels and the building of new coal plants, phasing out coal in OECD countries by 2030 and everywhere else by 2040. A pact that will provide universal, affordable, sustainable energy for all. A pact in which developed and emerging economies unite around a common strategy and combine capacities and resources for the benefit of humankind. The two largest economies, the United States and China, have a particular responsibility to join efforts to make this pact a reality. And this is our only hope of meeting our climate goals. Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
We come together for the 27th annual climate meeting 30 years after the adoption of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, 25 years since we adopted the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and 7 years following yet another historic milestone, the Paris Agreement adopted in 2015. When the convention was adopted in 1992, global emissions were approximately 27 gigatons annually. This has risen to about 40 gigatons, while carbon dioxide accumulation in the atmosphere has also steadily increased. For the past 8 consecutive years, documented by the UN to be the hottest years in recorded history, each new year has been hotter than the previous year. The whole world is reeling from the staggering impact of climate change. The spread, scale, and frequency of disasters like hurricanes, typhoons, wildfires, and heat waves, melting sea ice and glaciers, droughts and desertification, floods and rising sea levels in numerous regions of all continents indicate that humanity is confronting unprecedented devastation on a global scale. The state of climate and of climate in Africa reports lay it bare. High water stress is estimated to affect about 250 million people in Africa and is expected to displace up to 700 million people by 2030. In the past 50 years, drought-related hazards have claimed the lives of over 500,000 people and led to economic losses of over $70 billion in the region. More than 1,000 flood-related disasters were reported involving more than 20,000 deaths in Africa alone over this period. It is estimated that by 2050, climate impacts could cost African nations $50 billion annually. The Horn of Africa region, including Kenya, is experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. 2 consecutive years without rain have visited misery on millions of people. 2.5 million livestock have died in Kenya this year alone, causing economic losses of more than $1.5 billion. 2 days ago, we went to distribute food relief to 4.3 million affected Kenyans in an emergency program that has forced us to reallocate funds budgeted for education and health. The trade-offs we are forced to make between indispensable public goods is evident that climate change is directly threatening our people's lives, health, and future. Moreover, due to drought, many children have now dropped out of school. We have been compelled to make school feeding a priority in order to keep our children in class. Kenya's world-renowned wildlife heritage has not been spared either, and carcasses of elephants, zebras, wildebeest, and many other wild fauna litter our parks. We have had to spend $3 million to supply feed and water to wildlife in the last 3 months. Again, this backdrop, the lengthy discussions at COPs with its stalling, delaying tactics and procrastination that have hampered implementation and delivery is simply cruel and unjust. We cannot afford to spend more time skirting around the real issues, and we must break out of the open-ended, process-focused discussions we are trapped in. Further delay will make us busy spectators as calamity wipes out lives and livelihoods. As we speak, Mr. Chairman, the pledge made 13 years ago in Copenhagen, committing US dollars 100 billion annually, remains unfulfilled. Such a gracious and unexplained default is a major cause of persisting distrust, and neither is there any sound reason for the continuing pollution. In stark contrast, Kenya, a country with far less resources than the average developed country, has foregone pollution industrialization and growth opportunities and intentionally invested in green energy. It must be recalled that Kenya has tremendous hydrocarbon and coal deposits which could go a long way in fueling the engines of our development. Nevertheless, due to resolute commitment, our electricity grid is 93% green. This morning, we signed a framework agreement for collaboration on the development of sustainable green industries in Kenya with an investor to produce 30 gigawatts of green hydrogen in Kenya. There exists opportunities in Kenya to produce 20 gigawatts of wind power, 10 gigawatts of geothermal electricity, and being at the equator, considerable amount of solar energy. Green energy production opportunities are vast in Kenya and throughout Africa. In the East Africa alone, for example, there exists sufficient hydroelectric potential to produce 100,000 megawatts, and if properly exploited, could generate enough clean energy for the whole of the continent. Instead of struggling to power industrialization using dirty energy, which is costly and destroying our planet, we want to make a case for developed economies to decarbonize their production by directing industrial investments to Africa and making use of clean energy to manufacture for the whole world. Cop26 established the Glasgow Dialogue to formulate funding arrangements for measures to prevent, mitigate, and remedy loss and damage associated with adverse effects of climate change. Loss and damage is not an abstract topic of endless dialogue. It is our daily experience and the living nightmare of millions of Kenyans and hundreds of millions of Africans. A phenomenon of rising water levels in Rift Valley lakes was experienced in Kenya in 2020 and generated humanitarian crisis of unprecedented levels. Approximately 75,000 households were displaced in 13 counties, with a total population of 379,000 requiring urgent humanitarian assistance. The affected communities endured disruption for their livelihoods, losing homes, grazing lands, and farming fields, while social amenities like schools, health facilities, markets, fish landings, and processing facilities, once thriving hotels, curio shops, resorts, and lodges, electricity lines, and water supply and sanitation units were swallowed by water bodies. Loss and damage must therefore be addressed with a level of seriousness which demonstrates fairness, urgency, and consideration. Africa contributes less than 3% of the pollution responsible for climate change, but is most severely impacted by the ensuing crisis. Africa, and it is therefore only fair and proper that this conference takes necessary measures to recognize Africa's special needs and circumstances under the Paris Agreement, in line with the Convention and relevant decisions adopted by previous COPs. Beyond the overdue, legitimate, and priority concerns of resilience, mitigation, loss and damage, Africa offers unique potential to play an indispensable positive role in the planet's climate change future. Africa's vast tracts of land, deep treasures of diverse natural resources, tremendous untapped renewable energy potential, and a youthful, dynamic, and skilled workforce constitute the continent's irresistible credentials. Properly deployed, these assets could be crucial in driving global mitigation efforts while creating new economic opportunities in the continent. I am convinced of the need to more comprehensively showcase the opportunities that abound in Africa, such as green energy, smart agriculture, decarbonized manufacturing, e-mobility, and green building, all aimed at the attainment of zero carbon by 2050. As the coordinator of the Committee of African Heads of State and Governments on Climate Change, I therefore plan to convene a continental summit focusing on climate action next year. Accordingly, you are all invited to take part in Africa's march to sustainable economic transformation and green growth. Kenya's next significant export will be carbon credits. This is why we call for simplified, more transparent carbon market systems that directly benefit communities and not just intermediaries. Back home, I just launched an ambitious project to increase the national tree cover from the current 12% to 30% in 10 years. We intend to accomplish this by first growing 15 billion trees on approximately 10.6 million hectares of land throughout the country at an estimated cost of US $500 million. In conclusion, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the face of impending catastrophe, whose warning signs are already unbearably disastrous, weak action is unwise. No action is dangerous. At this point, in the progression of this calamity, we have few choices and little time. Our discourse must focus on delivery, and our conversation must be centered on our commitments and implementation. I call on every delegate here today to rise to the challenge of this moment, to make difficult but necessary decisions and seize transformative opportunity from the grasp of climate disaster. This means honoring spending commitments for mitigation and adaptation and mobilizing increased financial flows to those affected, especially in Africa. By keeping our promises and being bound by our word, we will demonstrate to people across the globe that their leaders are their honest agents and true guarantors. COP, this is our golden chance to vindicate present generations who look to us to lead the way in preserving our planet and to perform our role as trustees of future generations. The way things are, we might never have a more opportune time, and there might never be a better chance. I thank you.
First of all, may I, on behalf of the people of Seychelles, express our support and solidarity with all nations that have experienced the terrible effects of climate change lately. We stand by you as you mourn those who have disappeared and as you rebuild your towns and villages. Many, especially our youth, are asking whether COP is a counting game. 26, 27, 28, or whether it is a real countdown to saving our planet. My wish and prayer is that we leave Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace, with a peace pact with our planet, that we make good decisions and pledges that will be followed by concrete actions instead of another set of promises that take too long to materialize. Like other islands, our contribution in the destruction of the planet is minimal, yet we suffer the most. For example, the carbon emissions of Seychelles are very low, and we clean up our CO2 plus that of the world through our mangroves and seagrass meadows, making us a zero contributor to the destruction of the planet. And yet, our islands are disappearing and our coasts are being destroyed. It is an honor for me to stand here in Egypt at Cop27 to announce that in 2023, Seychelles will further contribute in mitigation by moving to 100% protection of all its mangroves and seagrass meadows, adding to the already 32% protection of our ocean and 50% of our landmass. We insist that the Multi-Vulnerability Index, the MVI, should be the new order. Seeds are vulnerable, and we need access to concessionary funding in order to defend ourselves against climate change while fulfilling the SDGs to give our people a better life. Industrialized nations and multinationals must pay greater attention to the loss and damage agenda. We, the oceanic states that suffer the harsh effects of your activities, have to be assisted in repairing the damage you cause to us. Seychelles is playing a leadership role in adaptation and mitigation. We are building strong partnerships, however small we are. This year, we welcome the Ocean Race Summit to discuss the urgency of saving our one ocean. Later, we offered the venue for the first European Blue Invest Forum outside Europe to put emphasis on financing the blue economy. And late last month, we welcomed Prince Albert of Monaco and the Monaco Research Expedition in the search of resilient corals. And of course, we are also active in promoting the Great Blue Wall project. Seychelles remains a serious partner on whom the world can count on in the protection of the planet. My call is for us to be very good partners. Let us give our youth a better planet, and may we leave Egypt with enhanced hope and commitment to save our one and only blue planet. I thank you.
Your Excellency the President, Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President Sisi, thank you for convening us and for a timely theme, delivering for people and the planet. What an opportune time to meet right after the COVID-19 pandemic. A time to reflect on COVID-19 effects to nature, people, and prosperity. Along with the pandemic came lessons, opportunities, and a powerful reminder of the nexus between environmental health and human health. A reminder to build back better and sustainably by retracking our footprints towards green transition. Our yesterdays in action should not be our today's excuse, because science has unfolded the scale of this planetary crisis in its effects to vulnerable communities and our course of action. The COVID-19 lockdowns gave us a stepping stone towards the right path. This green path is sustainable through transformed and modernized industry and infrastructure, accelerated economic diversification and competitiveness, and strengthened resilience. Excellencies, science has shown a direct correlation between human prosperity and environmental prosperity. Nature-based economy can be our reality if only we have a shared vision and leverage opportunities that deliver real and structural changes. We are in Sharm el-Sheikh, a city in a continent whose economy relies explicitly on natural resources, a continent where millions of its vulnerable communities are grappling with poor public health, greenhouse gas emissions, and loss of livelihoods due to severe climatic effects. Delays on concrete actions to address loss and damage leaves us with no choice but to realign our meager financial resources to build a climate-resilient economy that ensures survival of the bigger segment of our population that depends on agriculture for livelihood, and to save the looming decline of our gross national product, of which agriculture accounts for a greater share. On another hand, inaction means risking our development agenda and prosperity, and thus, in this regard, we in Tanzania has in place the National Climate Change Response Strategy and the National Determined Contributions, which set targets of reducing greenhouse gases emissions economy-wide between 30 to 35% by 2030. With an estimated $19.2 billion as cost of implementation. Now the question is, how on earth the country like Tanzania raise this amount of money for mitigation and adaptation of the climate effects? Nevertheless, showing the political will, Tanzania is continuing to construct and expand rapid transport networks that are expected to reduce more than 900 million tons of carbon generated each year. We are also determined to increase the use of renewable energy sources from 60% in 2015 to 80% in 2025. Tanzania also is committed to preserve 48 million hectares of forest, and this is about 55% of the total land area of the country. And on top of that, we are planting 200 million trees in every 3 years. All we are asking here is for an alignment of global carbon prices to help generate resources from these carbon sinks. Excellencies, this is the type of leadership exhibited by the developing countries that lack technological know-how, lacking financial and human capacities, having limited scientific information at our fingertips. Yet with these limitations, our part of the world is asked to choose life or death. The question is, do we have an option? Unless we do it together. And in this regard, We urge developed countries, especially the G20, to fulfill their commitments. We call upon effective implementation of technology transfer while unlocking climate finance to fund our national determined contributions. We are also urging the developed world to raise their subsequent NDC's ambitions to halt greenhouse gas emissions from crossing the irreversible tipping point of atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide. Having said that, Excellencies, I thank you for your kind attention.